Welcome everybody to the Pixalate webinar on quantifying made for advertising risk in 2024. It's the hottest topic in ad tech so far this year, even the end of last year as well. Pixalate has published a bunch of research on MFA, started to incorporate it into our products as well. We're here to talk to you about MFA, everything you need to know about it, and the latest benchmarks. I'll be your host. I'll do a little introduction now. I'm Tyler Loechner. I'll do a deeper introduction a little bit later. Our agenda today is we're going to look at what is MFA, the definition that Pixalate uses. We're going to look at Pixalate's methodology for MFA, how Pixalate has reported on MFA, different benchmarks that we've published that are used and our ongoing reporting on the topic, solutions to MFA, various different ways you can attack the challenge of MFA, and we'll wrap things up with a Q&A, a live Q&A from the audience. A brief introduction of the panelists and Pixalate. So Pixalate is an ad fraud and privacy compliance platform for connected TV, for mobile apps, and for websites. Pixalate was founded in 2012. We are MRC accredited for the detection and filtration of sophisticated invalid traffic across those different environments. Pixalate also has various solutions. We have the analytics platform where you can look at post-bid monitoring of your campaigns, the media ratings terminal, which lets you look up any app, website, including apps that have been delisted, and look at our both a high-level overview of the app as well as granular details about invalid traffic, viewability, where the traffic's coming from. We also have data feeds. These are pre-bid block lists that span across CTV, mobile apps, websites, high-risk IP addresses and devices, etc. We also publish a seller trust index and a publisher trust index. This ranks programmatic sellers and programmatic apps on their overall quality for open programmatic advertising on various different topics. We actually recently introduced an MFA score to our seller trust index as well. And then lastly, we also offer privacy compliance tools. Everybody knows the world of privacy compliance is changing rapidly, and its impact on ad tech. Pixalate offers tools that can help in that area as well. So diving into introductions, I already mentioned my name is Tyler Loechner. I'm the VP of Platform Growth and Research at Pixalate. I help oversee the research that we publish, including on MFA, ad fraud topics, privacy compliance, general benchmarks for the advertising industry. And I work closely with our team, both our research team, our data science team, to publish those insights. And Amit and Melwin, I will let them introduce themselves.
Thanks, Tyler. I'm Amit Shetty. I'm a VP of product here at Pixalate. Prior to Pixalate, I worked at places like Yahoo and also at IB Tech Lab, where I earned my ad tech chops in a sense and worked on a number of standards focused on improving transparency and generally improving the quality of advertising. At Pixalate, I would say I've continued down that path, working on products to help fight ad fraud and improve ad inventory quality, including the features that cover the topic for today, made for advertising. Melwin, do you want to go next?
Sure. So I'm Melvin James. I lead the data science and machine learning initiatives within Pixalate. Really passionate about bringing, data science, AI, machine learning to the world of ad tech and seeing how we can grow. Prior to Pixalate, I was in management consulting, basically building AI and data science tools for some of the largest Fortune 500 companies in the world. And before that, I got my master's from data science from UC Berkeley.
Great, thank you both for the introductions. Amit and Melwin are fantastic, brilliant people when it comes to detecting MFA and other, other points of interest in the ad tech supply chain. So let's dive into what is MFA. How does Pixalate define MFA? Generally speaking, MFA are websites or even apps that appear to prioritize advertising and ad revenue, often at the cost of user experience or relevant content. Now, you just saw a brief example of what an MFA website might look like. I'll pass it over to Amit, who can dive more into Pixalate's definition of MFA.
Yeah, Tyler, just like you said, it is clearly, it is content that's built by publishers. These are websites and apps that are built by publishers that favor ad revenue or content quality. And we do cover both websites and CTV apps and mobile apps, I should say, in the work that we've done. But for the purpose of this presentation, we'll focus on websites. The key thing is that these are websites that kind of hide in plain sight, right? So these are websites that look like they are low CPM, high viewability, very tempting to buy, but they really are not what they seem to be. They really are. When you look at the details of exactly what's happening on those sites, with the kind of ad traffic that's going on, it becomes clear that the quality of the ad traffic is questionable. In many cases, these websites don't show up as MFA when you just go directly to those links. It's only when you go to those specific links, that's when the MFA characteristics really surface on those websites.
Yeah, that's Melwin. Can you talk more to that point? Because that's actually something that I find very fascinating. Is a site might appear on an MFA list, and when you go to it and you look at it, it might not really look like MFA, but our data shows that there are URLs, right? Can you talk more about that?
Yeah, definitely. So when you think about MFA websites, a lot of these have a ton of pages, right? And when you go to any of these pages, you wouldn't find any ads at all. But there would be like a specific page, right, which would be like full of ads. And according to our research, what we have found is this page with all these ads, those are the pages which have been like propagated to the users, right, through social media, clickbait, whatnot, right? So those are like the conduits or the gateways for traffic for that website. So no matter how many pages there are on that website which have no ads, real traffic goes to these pages which is full of ads, and that's why these are MFA websites.
And I should say, this may not have been very clear with the small screenshots that you saw there, but you actually can see that there are ads from pretty big names, right? HBO Max, Adobe, Disney, Comcast, all of those were actually there on those screenshots that we showed. And that tells you that it's really some of the big advertisers that are being impacted by this problem.
Mm-hmm.
That's great. So I think next, we're going to jump into Pixalate's methodology. We defined MFA. You touched on it a little bit, Melwin. We're actually looking at the traffic going to those sites, which I think makes Pixalate pretty unique in this area. But why don't we dive more into that, Amit and Melwin? Explain our methodology. How do we actually categorize these sites as likely MFA? I'll let you take it away, Amit.
Sure. Yeah, good. Actually, Melwin, let's get you on.
Yeah, so the problem with MFA is everyone has a slightly different definition of what MFA is, right? Pixalate also has their own version of MFA. So even before we think about what MFA is, we have to think about what like a typical, almost like a user behavior or a user journey is for an MFA website, right? So usually what happens is a user, right, or what these MFA websites are trying to do is they're trying to exploit the deficiencies that are there currently in our ad tech systems, right? So what they're trying to do is they're trying to get these real users, and they're using techniques like social media, clickbaits, whatnot, and driving them to pages which are full of ads, right? So as soon as they open a page up, they are just bombarded with ads, right? So when you think about this behavior, right, what are the kinds of signals that you can look at to kind of model this behavior, right, or model or detect this kind of interaction, right? So we came up as Pixalate, with like 4 different signals. Number one is having a very high number of or a very high ad refresh rate. That's the number of ads delivered per minute per page, right? That's signal number one. I mentioned high, right, and it's a very subjective word, but we use a lot of quantitative and statistical techniques to determine what and high is. These are real outliers. These are not like, these are real outliers determined by actual, looking at actual data distributions of all across thousands and almost millions of websites and determining what an high ad refresh rate is. Similarly, we have high ad density, which is the number of placements per minute on a page. We also look at like the sources of traffic, right? And if majority of the traffic is sourced from social media or even paid traffic, right? If we can go to the next slide, what is important here is Pixalate uses actual user data, right, actual traffic data to determine whether or not a website is MFA. This is actually special and different because we do not rely on crawlers. Why? Because number one, crawlers can be easily gamed, right? Crawlers can be easily blocked, whatnot, right? Secondly, I think we touched upon it earlier, right? A lot of these MFA websites have a ton of pages. None of them would have ads. So if you send a crawler there, there's very likely that it wouldn't come up with any ads at all, because that's not where all the users go, right? So it's, for both these cases, we do not use crawlers, but actually use actual transaction or traffic data from these websites to determine whether or not a website is MFA.
Yeah, I want to add 2 points to what Melvin just said. One is actually I want to just re-emphasize what he said about us being data-driven, right? So when we say high, we don't just mean high as a qualitative metric, but actual outliers. I think that's actually an important thing to keep in mind. These, just because we have identified so that the signals are on the higher end of each of these metrics, doesn't mean that we designate those websites as MFA. They really have to be, in a sense, the worst of the worst to be counted as MFA. The second thing I did want to talk about a little bit is that if you look around in the industry, the definition of MFA itself is a little vague, right? So everyone has a different view of what it means to be MFA. I feel like what we have got is probably the most comprehensive set of things that we have seen talked about, and I also think that is one of the most things that can be based on real data. But the second part is that there's a reason why we publish and we talk about all these signals explicitly, right? So we want to be very transparent about what are the things that we factor in, so that people understand what we mean when we say something is MFA, and then they can take the decisions based on that information and understand, be able to compare apples to apples, if you will, in that sense.
Yeah, and what you're looking on this screen here is an example from the Media Ratings Terminal, the Pixalate platform, where we actually give risk scores as to the likelihood of MFA. So medium risk, high risk, different people in the supply chain might have different levels of tolerance for the risk. That's why we do it that way within the Media Ratings Terminal. And here you can see this view here is looking at 6,400 specific domains that were flagged as either medium risk or high risk, and then you get different data points about each one of those domains. So you can really double click into the data and analyze on a line item basis to see which domains are being flagged and which risk level they carry with them. And thank you, both for diving into the methodology there. I know we've published some blogs and research reports about it. So I think next we can talk a little bit about those research reports. Pixalate has an ad fraud and compliance research team that I'm sure if you guys are on this webinar, you've probably read at least one of our reports. Hopefully, if you haven't, check it out. But one of our topics has been MFA recently. And we first published an MFA report in Q4 of 2023, looking at October data. And if we can go to the next slide, that research found that 2% of websites with open programmatic advertising, as measured by Pixalate, 2% of those websites are flagged by Pixalate as likely MFA, but those 2% of websites actually received 11% of all open programmatic ad spend. That's based on Pixalate's estimates. It's aligned with other estimates that we've seen out there. So over 10% of open programmatic ad budgets right now are being spent on MFA websites, despite the fact that MFA sites are only 2% of the pie. Obviously, an outsized portion of ad spend is going to them. So certainly our data backs up the concern that the ad industry has expressed in MFA websites. We actually published more data on this about viewability, ad fraud risk on MFA sites. I know Amit mentioned earlier that often MFA sites have higher viewability levels, right, as a lure to to make it seem more appealing to advertisers. So Amit, I'll let you talk about, Amit and Melwin, I'll let you guys talk about those data points.
Sure. Right. Let's talk about IBT, right, before we go into viewability. So IBT, we measured IBT across MFA and non-MFA websites. We see 12% for MFA websites and around 10% for non-MFA websites, which is like a 20% increase in IBT. Right. Moving on to viewability, we see actually higher viewability in MFA websites than non-MFA websites, which is very weird and almost expected, right? Because as soon as somebody opens a page, MFA page, they see so many ads popping up, right? Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that's the key, right? If you think about both IVT and viewability, these sites look like they're normal and arguably better in many ways, and so combine that with the low CPMs that they usually are providing, that makes very tempting target for buyers who are like, oh, maybe we can reach a pretty good audience using these sites. But the question really is, the reality really is, given the density of ads, given the amount of ads that you're seeing, it really is questionable how how effective those ads really were.
Moving on, we actually also analyzed the domains itself, right, the websites itself, and determined what kind of categories these MFA websites belong to. The most common one was blogs, but other than the others, right, and others is like all the way in the last one, which is kind of an catch-all, which basically means these domains were not categorized, which makes sense because these are new domains, which are these are new domains, not categorized, not as popular, but drives all that traffic, right?
Yeah, and if you see all the different categories up there, especially blogs, there definitely does seem to be a correlation to user-generated content in my mind, and of course the common things like your recipe sites and all that, which and the entertainment sites, which are filled with which are basically clickbaity also, and that I think is matched by what we see from a categorization point of view.
Yeah, blogs, magazines, news and media are all very closely related, and those three alone are about 50%.
Mm-hmm.
So Pixalate has also published more recent data as well. This was our Q4 report. We also actually just published a Q1 look at the ad platforms that are used to sell ads on MFA websites most often. We took two different views of this data. We looked at the ads.txt files to see which platforms are listed as sellers on those websites, flagged as likely MFA. And then we also looked at actual transactions of which sellers are actually selling MFA ads or likely MFA ads most often. So Amit, were you gonna explain this data, or Melwin?
Sure, I can go. So as you can see, almost 69% of these MFA websites, this is March 2024 data, almost 69% of the MFA websites have Google listed in their ads.txt, right, followed by Magnet and Xandr monetize. One thing to make clear is it's not, these are like the most popular ones, right? The Google, Magnet, Xandr, they're the most popular ones, and that's why they kind of show up on their ads.txt. Yeah.
Right, this is the ads.txt files of the MFA sites.
Of the MFA websites, yes. Looking at it from an ad spend perspective, right? Looking at how much traffic and how much ad spend, and then looking at the sellers, we find Magnite, PubMatic, Ad Exchange, Index Exchange to be like the top three according to our data, followed by Equator, Xandr, and OpenX.
Right.
Yeah, and
whoops, sorry. I was going to say, and the key thing over here is that these are all names that are pretty well known in the industry, and basically indicates that this is a problem that's prevalent across the industry, right? So this is something that I believe everyone has to pay attention to and really start looking at techniques to start preventing this from happening. Like be very data driven, truly understand where the traffic is coming from and try to block those.
Yeah, and I'll add that Pixalate is going to be publishing regularly on this topic. You can go download our most recent report with that March 2024 data that shows the sellers that are selling the most likely MFA inventory. We also, in that report, we also have a list of sellers selling the least likely MFA inventory as well, and the sellers listed on the least amount of ads.txt files. We also, on our seller trust index, we give an MFA risk score, like I mentioned previously. So definitely check out that data and keep tabs on the reports that we will have coming out, because like Amit said, we're trying to be very transparent with what Pixalate is observing in the MFA ecosystem. Now I'll pass it back to you on moving from the sellers to the actual publishers themselves that we've seen.
Sure. So these are some examples of the MFA domains that we have seen, and the top MFA domains by like the share of voice, or sorry, the ad spend. A lot of them, as you can see, like cooking, health, a lot of like user-generated content, as Amit mentioned. Yeah, these drive a lot of traffic. It's very surprising, and just a lot of MFA, behavior basically on this website.
And to Tyler's point, this is something that we publish on our website and is available for free for anyone who, I think you do need to provide your email, but after that, you can look at all these lists. I believe we show the top 100 or 200 on that page.
Yeah, and I'll note, I think the call out on the side here is pretty interesting. 13% of open programmatic ad spend on sites flagged as MFA by Pixalate went to just the top 5 domains. So there's a long tail of MFA sites, but a lot of ad spend is going towards the ones at the top as well. So next we'll talk about, I'll pass this over to Amit to talk about Pixalate's solutions to the MFA challenge that you can use and can help you navigate in the supply chain.
Yeah, so hopefully the reports that we're publishing will help educate everyone and really have everyone start actively working to prevent this kind of traffic. But in addition to these free industry reports, Pixalate does offer a number of solutions to fight MFA traffic, right? Some of the, and actually some of these are free, like that top MFA list that you saw, but there are others as well where, and what you see on the screen kind of lists that, provides you that whole list of things that we do. On the media ratings terminal, we provide the more detailed information about the MFA websites, apps and CTV, mobile apps and CTV apps as well. In our analytics platform, which is our post-bid analytics, you can look at the MFA, the impact of MFA traffic on your first-party traffic itself, right? So how much of your traffic is MFA? And we also have data feeds that allow you to quickly and easily block MFA traffic. Here it's focused more, we provide a simple breakdown of high, medium, low information or categorization of the websites so that you can decide which one you want to apply to. And finally, we already talked about the seller and publisher trust indices. So that's something that's available for free for anyone to come take a look at.
Great, thanks, Amit. So I know you guys each had kind of some recap thoughts here, recap the key points of what should people leave this webinar thinking about MFA and kind of next steps as they get back to work and try to avoid spending on MFA sites.
I'll go first. I think that really, I'm just going to reiterate what we talked about earlier. This is a problem that really does exist, is persistent across the industry, something that I'm really glad that everyone is paying a lot more attention to. And it's important to be truly data-driven in our approach to fighting this, right? So look at this not just from a qualitative touchy-feely point of view, but actually be data-driven, see how much of how the traffic looks like, and take your decisions based on that.
Yeah, definitely. I also think just thinking about the future, given in the world of like ChatGPT, LLMs, generating fake content and publishing MFA websites is going to be so much more easier going forward, right? Just because of all the tools that are out there. So this problem is just going to get bigger and bigger in the future. So having the right tools and the right processes right now is really going to help you, set yourself for success in the future. Otherwise, you are just going to, like, sellers, anyone in this ad tech in ecosystem, are just going to spend a lot of time dealing with this problem, time and money dealing with this problem for sure.
Great. Well, I think that wraps up what we had prepared. And a couple of you have sent in some questions. If you do have any questions for Amit or Melwin or Pixalate in general, if we're not able to get to all of them, go ahead and use the chat box here to send in your questions and we'll field them. But a couple that we do already have on, I think this is a good one for Melwin, is can MFA alone be considered invalid traffic? Or what additional aspects could influence categorization?
Sure, I think that's a very good question. And I think one of the slides kind of mentioned that, right? So the slides was basically, I think there were 12% IVT on MFA websites and 10% on non-MFA, which basically means they're almost on parity, right? MFA and non-MFA is on parity, which basically means, and one more thing you have to remember, MFA, these are not bots, these are actual users going to these websites, right? So I think there should be a huge differentiation between what is IVT is and MFA is. These are two different buckets and should not be kind of bucketed together. Yeah, and I kind of lost the second part of the question, Tyler. So yeah, number one,
actually, if I can add to what you just said, Melwin, there are certain, if you look at the list of different types of IVT, right, and things that defined by the MRC, but also things that we support, there are IVT types that sound very similar to MFA, right? So in terms of the number of ads that are being produced and all that, but this is the key part. These are not, we do differentiate between those two, right? So IVT is definitely IVT. What we talk about over here is traffic that cannot be categorized IVT because it comes from actual users, because it's not bot generated and so on. So we believe that there is a very clear distinction between what's IVT and what's MFA.
Yeah.
Great. I don't know if you guys can see me anymore. I seem to have disappeared for a minute, but I can't see myself. So I'm sorry if your host is now just a faceless voice. But we did get another question that said, I heard you mention CTV and mobile apps, but the webinar didn't discuss those. Can you talk more about MFA, CTV, or mobile apps? What even are those?
I'll take us off, start off, and Melwin, please do add. So we do believe that mobile apps and CTV apps can be MFA as well, right? So and again, this is because of our approach to MFA, which is entirely based on the actual traffic patterns that we are seeing. And it is also true that the scale is very different with mobile apps and CTV apps compared to websites. I think partly because it takes a lot more additional effort to get an app, create an app, have it get installed, and so on. But that doesn't preclude it from being MFA. And if you look at some of the content that we have on our website, some of the reports that we have, you can see that there are these are apps that truly are not, again, the same concepts, right? So not the best from a content, from a usable user content point of view, more meant for ad traffic, especially on CTV. You can see a lot of ads that are running, that are videos that are playing in the background with audio off, but they are most likely being sold as actual in-stream videos and so on. So there are a lot of those kind of characteristics that we see in those apps. The only thing I wanted to end there was that the set of our methodology for mobile apps and CTV apps factors in a bunch of different signals. Melvin, anything you want to add there?
Yeah, I would basically just add the fact that you kind of mentioned all the points that I wanted to mention. The only thing I would add there is what happened really here was we looked at the domains, right, the websites, and we looked at the behavior of these MFA websites, and we were like, and like even like the leadership at Pixelate was like, oh, do we see it in mobile and CTV? And we basically used our learnings, kind of applied it on mobile and CTV, and we saw, oh, are there any domains, or sorry, are there any apps which have an MFA kind of behavior in mobile? And there you go, we had some apps. We actually went and tested these apps as well, right? And we saw, oh wow, really, there is like, it's new. Again, as you mentioned, the scale is not the same, but it's definitely there in both CTV and mobile for sure.
Right. It's substantial enough that it needs to be looked at in our
Exactly.
opinion.
Yeah.
Another question we got is about the recent Forbes story, the www3.forbes.com, asking what is Pixalate's opinion of that story? Is it invalid traffic? Is it MFA? And what can be done to avoid similar situations?
I don't have the numbers with me right now, but I do think that all the indicators are that it is MFA traffic. I do disagree with the, I've been tracking some of the conversations on the topic, so I can guess where that question is coming from. I do disagree with the idea that it is IVT, right? So the idea that W3, I think it is w3.forbes.com versus forbes.com, that is not misrepresentation in the sense of it is coming from a Forbes website, right? So and if you take a step back and look at it from other traffic sources, right? So if you think about news.yahoo.com or news.google.com, would you consider that as being IVT, as misrepresented traffic or not? Is I think probably the simplest analogy to consider when you're thinking about that. Now that doesn't take away from the fact that this may have been intentionally built to push MFA traffic, but I don't think that it can be considered IVT.
Yeah, I think you said it very well. I do feel that I do believe that it was a bit MFA-ish, right? And I think Forbes also kind of agreed that it was MFA. Yeah, and basically my take on that.
Another question we got is, you released data on October and then again in March. What were the most notable changes over those 6 months? It's actually an interesting question because it feels like the MFA conversation just started, but looking back, it has been over half a year now. So, what have we seen change from the end of 2023 to where we are now?
I would say just if you look at the number of domains, right, from websites, it hasn't changed a lot. But I do feel the overall like ad spend, right, has gone down. I wouldn't say a lot, but like I would say it's gone down a little bit. Kind of gives me a feeling that there has been some education among the industry, but not enough action. I almost feel like that's my kind of
I want to say two things there. One is that we have noticed that the set of websites, the set of apps that are marked as MFA has been switching, right? At least from a worst, if you look at the worst list, that has definitely been changing, which most likely means that, I'm assuming this is an assumption on my part, but it most likely means that those apps and websites might have already been blocked by certain entities. So there's a pretty good chance that was the reason why that changed so dramatically. The second part is actually, I think this is a really fair question, and I think that we have a new set of MFA reports coming up. I think next month. We'll definitely make sure to factor in a trend line and do a comparative study at that point.
Yeah, I would just add to that, we did have the list of sellers between October and March. It was a little more top heavy in October, and the sellers at the top saw their share of ads on likely MFA decrease. Google also decreased on the ads.txt files, both of which are going in the right direction, I would say. So I admit, I do think it's a great idea to add some trend lines now that we've got some historical data as well. And then I would also just add that while MFA was a hot topic in Q4 of last year, it seems to have really become even more so in 2024. A lot more news stories about it, a lot more kind of outside of just ad tech news stories as well. So I do think on the education front, Melwin, to your point, I do think that has been a noticeable difference between 6 months ago and now as well.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, I do think we have a couple other questions. Like Amit said, we're planning on doing more MFA reports. We can perhaps publish another blog answering some more FAQs about MFA. If we want to go to the next slide, just briefly touch on the fact that Pixalate, what we're sharing here are Pixalate's opinions based on the data that we've seen. And I wanted to thank everybody for joining us as we overview the sites that we flag as likely MFA, what you can do about it, the tools that you have at your disposal to educate yourself on MFA. Like I mentioned earlier, different companies, depending where you sit, there might be different risk tolerance levels. Pixalate gives you the ability to measure those against your own business objectives. And we will continue to publish data, not just on MFA, but publish data on the ad tech supply chain overall, including privacy compliance. So thank you, Amit. Thank you, Melwin. Thank you to all the attendees. And a recording of this webinar will also be available in the coming days that you can share with any colleagues that might have missed or that you think might find this helpful. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.